Have you ever heard of a kingdom so rich that gold was said to fall from the hands of its people like dusk? A land so powerful that Europe for centuries tried to pretend it never existed? This isn't a myth or a forgotten fable. This is the real story of an empire that glowed like the sun itself. An African empire that Europe tried to erase from the pages of history. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the golden sands of the Sahara stretching endlessly beneath a burning sky. The wind hums softly, carrying the scent of dust, spice, and distant rain. Now, picture a long caravan, thousands of camels moving in slow, graceful rhythm across the desert. Their backs are heavy with salt, silk, ivory, and sacks filled with gold dust so fine it shines like sunlight in a man's palm. The traders hum old songs of home, songs of Mali. Long before the name Europe meant power, long before ships carried explorers and conquerors across the sea, Africa already had empires, vast, complex, and beautiful civilizations. Among them was one that stood above all, the Empire of Mali. It was a kingdom born from courage and vision, stretching across what we now know as Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Niger, and Guinea. From the Atlantic coast to the heart of the Sahara, Mali's power pulsed like a golden heartbeat through the African continent. And at its center stood a man whose name time could never bury, Mansa Musa. He was not just a king, he was a force of destiny. When Musa rose to the throne in the early 1300s, he inherited not only a land of wealth, but a dream to build a nation that reflected the greatness of his people and the glory of his God. Under his rule, Mali became the richest empire on earth. Gold flowed through its veins, traded across the deserts to Egypt, Morocco, and beyond. Cities like Gao and Timbuktu glistened like jewels in the sand. But Musa's empire was not only rich in gold, it was rich in knowledge, faith, and humanity. Then came the journey that would make the world take notice. In 1324, Mansa Musa decided to make the pilgrimage to Mecca. But this was no ordinary pilgrimage. It was a display of faith and fortune the likes of which history had never seen. Imagine it, a procession stretching further than the eye could see. 60,000 men dressed in fine silks, soldiers bearing spears tipped with gold, slaves carrying staffs of pure metal, 80 camels, each loaded with over 300 pounds of gold. The desert sun bounced off every coin, every jewel, every shimmering cloth, turning the sands into waves of light. And at the center of it all rode Musa, calm, composed, his robes glimmering with the same golden hue as the empire he represented. When he passed through Cairo, the entire city stopped to watch. He gave so much gold in gifts, charity, and trade that the value of gold itself collapsed and didn't recover for years. Europe heard whispers of this king, this African emperor whose wealth no one could measure. For the first time, they placed Africa on their maps not as a mystery, but as a kingdom of gold. They drew him sitting on a throne, holding a golden staff and orb, his eyes calm and wise. But what they saw frightened them, because it shattered their story. You see, for centuries, the Western world would tell the lie that Africa was dark, uncivilized, and in need of salvation. But how could they tell that story
when the truth was staring them in the face, when an African empire had been more powerful, more educated, and more generous than most of Europe at the time. So, they changed the story. They rewrote the maps. They silenced the griots, the storytellers who carry in their voices, and they buried the truth under centuries of distortion. They never wanted the world to know about Timbuktu, a city that was once the intellectual heart of the world. There, the great Sankore University stood tall, its walls lined with manuscripts on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, poetry, and law. There, scholars debated philosophy beneath lantern light, and students came from across Africa and the Arab world to learn. There, books were worth more than gold.
And as Europe stumbled through its dark ages, Mali's people were writing, building, trading, and dreaming. But slowly, time turned. Empires rose and fell, rivers changed their course, and the desert crept forward, swallowing the roads once alive with traders and songs. Mali weakened from within, civil wars, droughts, invasions, and as it faded, so too did its memory. By the time European ships arrived on African shores, Mali's golden age had become a whisper. And that was convenient for them, because an erased history is easier to conquer. But the truth cannot be buried forever. Today, if you walk through Mali's sands, you might still find remnants. Ancient manuscripts hidden in clay jars, preserved for families for generations. You might hear griots singing songs that speak of kings and queens, of caravans glittering beneath the sun, of a time when Africa taught the world the meaning of greatness. You might feel it, that quiet hum beneath the earth, that pulse of pride refusing to die, because Africa remembers. The Empire of Mali was never just about gold. It was about humanity, intellect, and unity. It was about a people who believed that wealth was meant to serve, not enslave. And that spirit still lives in the rhythm of our drums, in the courage of our youth, in the fire of our storytellers who refuse to let the world forget.
Europe may have tried to erase Mali's glory, but no empire built on lies can silence the truth forever. For every hidden manuscript, every forgotten melody, every broken monument, there is a story rising again, a story of who we were and who we can be. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all, that Africa's power was never just in its gold, but in its soul, in its unbreakable will to rise again and again, no matter how many times the world tries to write it out of history. So when we speak of Mali today, we are not just remembering a lost empire. We are calling its spirit back into the present, to remind the world that Africa's story did not begin with slavery or colonization. It began with kings and scholars, poets and dreamers. It began with empires of light, not darkness. And if you listen closely, even now, you can hear it. The whisper of drums in the desert wind, the chant of traders long gone, the voice of Mansa Musa echoing through the sands of time. We were here, it says. We built, we ruled, we shone. And no matter how much they try to erase it, Africa remembers, the world remembers, and the Golden Empire still glows in the hearts of her children.